Hello everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the Holland Land Office Museum's Artifact Video Series. My name is Ryan Duffy and I'm the Director of the Museum, and this week we're going to discuss one of the most impactful people upon Genesee County's history, the Seneca Chief, Red Jacket, whose portrait is up above the fireplace up above me here. Now Red Jacket, or Sagoyewatha as he was known, which meant keep or awake, was born around 1750, though the location where he was born is disputed amongst three separate locations. One is at the old Seneca Castle, which was near modern-day Geneva. The other is on the banks of Cayuga Lake, and the other is on the banks of Cayuga Lake near the Basswood Creek. Now that spot is particularly important as we know that he did grow up there. And that's actually where his mother is buried after she died. Now, Red Jacket's life is consumed by really the early part of American history. He is involved in just about all of it, and you can see how the growth of the United States affects his life both negatively and positively. Now, Red Jacket spent most of his life in the Genesee Valley region and further in western New York, and became one of the most well-known and most respected Seneca Chiefs of the area. Now, this brought him into relationships with other famous chiefs, including Joseph Brant, Corn Planter, and Handsome Lake. Now, Joseph Brant in particular was somewhat more of an antagonistic relationship, as though they would be allies through much of their life, it would be a very unharmonious relationship. For instance, during the American Revolution, Red Jacket and the Senecas and Joseph Brant's Mohawks both sided with the British, fighting against the American colonists. Now, the reason behind this was that by siding with the British, their claims to the land would probably be better protected, and it would stop American encroachment going farther west into Iroquois territory. Now, Brant and Red Jacket's relationship is sort of encapsulated after the Battle of Newtown in 1779, when Brant called Red Jacket cow killer because he claimed that Red Jacket came back with cow's blood to show that he had killed an American soldier, even though Red Jacket had disputed this, as that was sort of the custom to show that you had actually participated in the battle. So this only caused more acrimony between the two famous chiefs. Following the Revolutionary War, Red Jacket became an even larger leader amongst the Iroquois and the Native American populations of the American East. He was known as a great orator, and he put that to work on his negotiations with the United States government and other various levels of society. In 1792, he actually traveled to Philadelphia and met with then President George Washington, along with other major Native American chiefs. This was to strike a peaceful relationship between the fledgling United States and the major tribes of the Americas. And Red Jacket was foremost amongst them. And at that meeting, he received a large silver medal that had an engraving of Washington and himself exchanging peaceful terms. And he would wear this in every single portrait and picture that was done of him, and in the portrait behind us, he is wearing it around his neck. Now this medal is actually on display at the Buffalo History Museum, so you can actually go there and see it for yourself, and it's quite a remarkable piece. In 1794, Red Jacket was one of the major signers of the Treaty of Canandaigua, which essentially ceded the Seneca's rights to all the area of western New York, essentially from today's Seneca Lake all the way to Lake Erie. This was signed basically as repercussions following the Revolutionary War, as the British allies lost the rights to all of that territory and ceded it to the United States without ever really consulting their Native American allies, the Iroquois being one of them. So they were swept up in that. Now this treaty was the beginning of the Phelps-Gorham Purchase, but severely impacted the Senecas and put them on the wrong foot going forward, and really started to decrease their power rather steadily from that point on, as we see with further treaties. The Phelps-Gorham Purchase fell through, though. They were forced to sign another treaty with the next buyer of the land, and that was Robert Morris. Now, the Treaty of Big Tree was signed in September 1797, and this is what finally extinguished the Seneca's rights to the western portion of western New York, essentially from the Genesee River west. Now, that treaty, the final deal of the treaty was that the Senecas would receive $100,000 in exchange for the rights to 3.25 million acres worth of land, which then 200,000 acres would then be reserved for 10 Native American reservations. Now, this was a treaty that Red Jacket never wanted to sign, and it's because of his efforts that it actually takes a month to even get to that point. However, Red Jacket was in the minority, as many of the other chiefs that were present at the treaty signing wanted to sign the treaty as quickly as possible. It was only through his great skill and leadership that it actually took as long as it did, which it helped improve the terms at least somewhat. And his efforts were really undone when the Morris camp introduced alcohol to the proceedings, which steadily wore down the opposition to signing the treaty from the Seneca side, and it eventually led to the signing of the treaty. Now, alcohol would be a major portion of Red Jacket's adult life, and he would actually contribute to one of his downfalls, and probably his biggest regret in his life is that he ever took a sip of alcohol. And this is sort of where that begins. Now, at the end of those negotiations, Joseph Brant's relationship with Red Jacket actually comes up again, as Brant tells a rather insulting story of Red Jacket, which almost sends Red Jacket over the edge, and he actually tries to attack Joseph Brant, but is only held back by his good friend and other major chief, Corn Planter. So Joseph Brant and Red Jacket's relationship never really smooths out, and it's really a dichotomy of leaders within the Iroquois, for good or bad, depending on your point of view. Now, you might be asking, well, where does the name Red Jacket come from? And it's actually a very simple story, a very literal story in the end, as he was called Red Jacket because he favored a scarlet jacket that was given to him by a British officer while they were allies during the Revolutionary War. And he would wear this jacket just about everywhere he went, and it's where he got the name Red Jacket. Red Jacket's Seneca name was Sagoyewatha, which translates to "he keeps them awake," and this came from the fact that he was a great orator. And his greatest feat as an orator actually came in 1805 when he went to the Capitol and spoke to Congress on the conditions, plight, and relationships with the Native American tribes, and essentially laid out a very forward-thinking and rather liberal argument as to how the Native Americans and white society could coexist, as he would lay out. This was first given in a debate with a missionary from New England who talking about God and that there's only one God and one religion. Red Jacket went on to say that their religion is good for the Senecas, and it does not mean that it has to be good for Anglo-American society. They can be separate and still coexist, and this was something that he tried to reiterate to Congress in saying that we can live together as our goals are most likely the same, we just go about them a different way. And he recalls back to the earliest European colonists and how they were able to coexist with their Native American neighbors and work together in order to improve their lives. And that this does not have to be an antagonistic relationship, it can be a cohesive relationship basically as long as each side is allowed to retain their culture and heritage, religion, language, all of that. It was a stunning oration and is gone down as one of the greatest ever, but it sort of fell on deaf ears as we know from history going forward from that point. So in the later years of his life, he actually lived in Buffalo on what was the Buffalo Creek Reservation, which today would be the South Buffalo area. And that's actually where he passes away and is buried in the Buffalo Creek Indian Church. Red Jacket passes away on January 20th, 1830. And his remains stayed there for quite a while, though that would not be the final resting place. As in 1876, Buffalo politicians petitioned to basically gather up his remains and remove them to the Forest Lawn Cemetery, which was the major cemetery in Buffalo. This process took quite a while, as it wasn't until 8 years later, in 1884, that his remains were finally moved. And this brought thousands of people in attendance, including his descendant, Ely Parker, who was given Red Jacket's medal as his sign of leadership, as he was a direct descendant from Red Jacket on his mother's side. Today, if you go to Forest Lawn Cemetery, it's very hard to miss the monument of Red Jacket, which is very near the front entrance and is one of the taller structures in the cemetery. So you can still witness his resting place today and its rather prominence. And there's still a marker where he was buried at the Indian Church area in South Buffalo today too. So there are several markers still dedicated to Red Jacket. On that, his name is used on many things throughout Western New York. There is a dormitory building at the University of Buffalo named after him. There is the Red Jacket Dining Hall at SUNY Geneseo. There is the Red Jacket building in downtown Buffalo. There is a statue in Red Jacket Park in Penn Yan near Cayuga Lake, which is one of the possible places where he was born. There's the Red Jacket Yacht Club, which is on Cayuga Lake. There is the Red Jacket ship, was a clipper, which set the speed record, from New York to Liverpool, England. There's a public school system named after him, Red Jacket Central Schools, which is in Ontario County. There's a section of the Buffalo River named the Red Jacket Peninsula, there's Red Jacket Parkway in South Buffalo, and oddly enough, there's even a community called Red Jacket in West Virginia named after him, though there's no confirmation that he ever was in that area. So it's his legacy and his name goes beyond even Western New York. Well, I hope you enjoyed this edition of our Artifact video series. As always, if you've missed any in the past, feel free to go back and check them out on our YouTube channel, Holland Office Museum. And we'll be putting out more of these in the coming weeks, and hopefully you enjoy all those. But if you've really enjoyed them, feel free to stop on by the museum and come check out Mr. Red Jacket himself, and we'll be happy to share even more information with you when you come in.